Marina Garst thought the worst part of her year was the failure of her final thesis. She had no idea that stumbling through the wrong hangar door would dismantle her entire future. The typhoon battered Incheon airport like a physical weight, turning the tarmac into a gray, swirling abyss of delayed flights and screaming engines. Marina's phone was dead, a black brick in her pocket, and her last few one had been spent on a lukewarm convenience store triangle kimbap. Through the blur of rain and exhaustion, she saw a flickering neon sign held by a man in a crisp suit. VIP transport, SNU. That's me, she rasped, her voice thin from a developing fever. She was an SNU exchange student. Surely this was the university's promised shuttle for stranded scholars. She followed him blindly through a side door and up a set of stairs. The air inside the cabin was pressurized, smelling of expensive sandalwood and old money. Marina didn't even look at the seats. She collapsed onto a leather bench, pulled her University of Seoul hoodie tight, and let the darkness take her. She woke to the low hum of engines and the sharp, rhythmic click-tap of fingers on glass. Who the hell are you? Marina's eyes snapped open. She wasn't in a shuttle bus. She was in a flying palace of wood paneling and chrome. Across from her sat a man who looked like he had been carved out of granite. Silver hair, eyes like frozen flint, and a suit that cost more than her mother's mortgage. He held two phones, his gaze shifting between them and her like she was a bug that had crawled into a clean room. This is the university shuttle, Marina stammered, her heart hammering against her ribs. This is a Gulfstream G650, Brett Harris replied, his voice an icy blade. And you are currently trespassing at 40,000 feet. Give me one reason why I shouldn't have the authorities waiting on the tarmac in Jeju. It was an accident. I saw the sign. The sign was for the Samsung North Union delegation, Brett interrupted, a bitter, mocking smile touching his lips. But I suppose a clumsy student is a better cover story than most industrial spies use. How much are they paying you to sit there and look pathetic? Is it the board? Did my cousin send you? Marina felt the heat of indignation rise, overriding her fear. She sat up straight, her damp hoodie contrasting sharply with the pristine cream leather. Nobody sent me. I'm just a student who hasn't slept in 48 hours and made a mistake. You can keep your leather and your paranoia, Mr. CEO. Just land the plane. Brett studied her, the defiance in her eyes, the university logo on her chest, and the sheer audacity of her tone. He glanced at a message on his phone. The board expects a fiancé by Monday, or the acquisition is dead. He set both phones down. What's your name, student? Marina. Not that it's your business. Well, Marina, Brett leaned forward, the lightning outside the window illuminating the tattoos creeping up his neck. I'm about to make you a very wealthy trespasser. I need a mistake. And you look exactly like the kind of mistake my board of directors will hate. The lightning hit Incheon like a physical blow, plunging the terminal into a suffocating, strobe-lit darkness. Marina Garst didn't care about the omens. She only cared that her bank account held exactly 01 and her body felt like it was composed of lead. Through the haze of a growing fever, she saw a man in a crisp charcoal suit holding a placard. VIP transport SNU****. Finally, she exhaled, her breath ghosting in the humid air. As an exchange student at Seoul National University, she assumed the school had actually come through. She followed the escort through a restricted side hangar, her vision tunneling as she ascended the stairs of a sleek, dark aircraft. The cabin smelled of sandalwood and power. She didn't look at the layout. She simply collapsed into a cream leather seat, pulled her University of Seoul hoodie over her face, and vanished into a deep, dreamless sleep. She woke to a terrifying silence and the sharp, rhythmic asterisk click-tap of a stylus against glass. Who the hell are you? Marina's eyes snapped open. She wasn't on a bus. She was 30,000 feet in the air, staring into the frozen flint eyes of Brett Harris. He looked like a statue carved from silver and spite, holding two phones like weapons. This is the university shuttle, she stammered. This is a Gulfstream, he replied, his voice an icy blade. And you're currently trespassing in a war zone. The private terminal in Jeju was a tomb of glass and silence. As the Gulfstream stairs lowered, the humid island air rushed in, but Marina felt only the predatory chill of Brett Harris's gaze on her back. She was no longer a student. She was an asset being processed. Waiting on the tarmac was a woman with hair pulled back so tight it looked painful. She didn't greet Marina. She simply handed her a matte black box and a mobile phone that didn't have a SIM card slot. Your old life is in a locker at Incheon, Brett said, stepping past her without looking back. From this moment, you are a graduate of the London School of Economics. Your father is a retired diplomat. You met me at a charity gala in Geneva. Learn the dates. If you stumble, we both burn. Transition was violent in its efficiency. In the back of a tinted limousine, the assistant stripped away Marina's salt-stained University of Seoul hoodie, replacing it with a silk slip dress that felt like liquid mercury. Her battered sneakers were traded for heels that forced her to walk with a lethal, precarious grace. Diamonds, heavy, cold, and borrowed, were fastened around her throat like a shimmering collar. As they pulled into the gates of a sprawling, high-tech fortress overlooking the volcanic cliffs, Marina caught her reflection in the privacy glass. The exhausted girl who had fainted in a hangar was gone. In her place stood a sleek, enigmatic socialite curated to Brett's exact specifications. She looked at her hands, now manicured and devoid of ink stains, and felt the weight of the $15,000. It wasn't just a fee, it was the price of her disappearance. She was Sion's mystery woman now, a ghost in a designer shell, entering a den of vipers. The digital clock on the wall of the study bled red light into the early morning hours, ticking toward 4:00 a.m. for Marina. This wasn't a romance. It was a grueling dissertation defense. Brett sat across from her, illuminated by the cold glow of a tablet, his silver hair shimmering like steel under the recessed lighting. Between them lay a dossier as thick as a phone book, containing the artificial data of their shared life. "Geneva," Brett barked, his voice raspy but unyielding. "What was the name of the vintage we drank when I told you I loved you for the first time?" 1945 Romane Conti, Marina answered instantly, her eyes blurring over the spreadsheets of his personal history. "It tasted like dirt and ego, and I told you it was overrated. That's why you liked me. I was the only person in the room who didn't lie to you." Brett's eyes flickered, a brief flash of something unreadable behind the flint. "Good, and my mother's favorite flower." "White lilies, but you only buy them on the anniversary of her death. Every other day, you pretend flowers don't exist because they're biological waste." They spent hours synchronizing their lies, building a bridge of false memories over the chasm of their mutual distrust. Marina memorized the layout of his childhood home, the names of his enemies on the board, and the precise cadence of his public persona. In return, Brett mapped her, learning her favorite childhood book and the exact frequency of her laughter. He treated her like an algorithm he needed to optimize, a piece of code that had to run perfectly to bypass the board's security. As the sun began to bleed over the Jeju horizon, Marina realized they had crafted a history so detailed it felt like a haunting. They knew everything about each other's shadows, yet nothing about their light. They had successfully built a masterpiece of deception, but as Marina watched Brett's reflection in the window, she realized the most dangerous part of the data. It was getting harder to remember where the script ended and the silence began. How should Marina handle the first direct confrontation with Brett's rival, when they inevitably try to trip her up on a detail they didn't cover in their session? The estate was a brutalist masterpiece of obsidian and glass, perched on a volcanic cliff that seemed to grow out of the churning East China Sea. As the heavy steel doors slid open, Marina felt the atmospheric pressure change. This wasn't a home. It was a theater of war disguised by mid-century modern furniture and the scent of expensive ozone. Brett didn't offer his hand as they entered the grand hall, but his presence was a cold weight at her side, a silent command to perform. Standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows were the Vipers, 5 men and 2 women who controlled the flow of global capital. They didn't smile, they calculated. Their eyes swept over Marina's silk-clad frame, looking for the fraying thread that would unravel Brett's empire. Among them was Jae-hoon, Brett's cousin, whose grin was as sharp and sterile as a scalpel. He held a crystal glass of whiskey like a weapon, his gaze lingering on Marina's throat as if checking the fit of her borrowed diamonds. "So this is the woman who tamed the ghost," Jae-hoon remarked, his voice a smooth, dangerous purr. He stepped into her personal space, the smell of expensive peat and malice radiating off him. "We've searched every social registry from London to Seoul, Brett. Your fiancée is quite the phantom. It makes one wonder if she exists at all or if she was simply manufactured for the occasion." Marina felt the prickle of sweat beneath her silk, but she didn't blink. She remembered the data, the shadows, and the stakes. She met Jae-hoon's gaze with a sociological coldness that matched the room's temperature. "Some people live their lives for the registry, Jae-hoon," she said, her voice steady and bored. "Others prefer to live them for themselves. I'm sorry our privacy has been such an inconvenience to your detectives." The room went silent, the tension tightening like a wire. The game had truly begun. The air in the traditional pavilion was thick with the scent of roasted barley and the heavy, unspoken judgments of Chairman Kang. As the eldest member of the board, his approval was the final gatekeeper to Brett's acquisition, and he sat on the tatami mats like a relic made of iron. Brett had instructed Marina to remain a silent, decorative presence, the refined European socialite who spoke only when spoken to. But as she watched the chairman's precise, rigid movements, Marina recognized the subtext of the ceremony. This wasn't just tea. It was a ritual of hierarchy and cultural gatekeeping designed to expose her as an outsider. When the moment came for the guest of honor to comment on the brew, Marina didn't offer the rehearsed Swiss pleasantries Brett had scripted. Instead, she leaned forward, her movements fluid and grounded, and spoke in the formal, nuanced Korean she had mastered during her grueling year at SNU. "The depth of this Hwangsha is remarkable, Chairman," she said softly, her tone carrying a scholar's weight. "It reminds me of the Joseon-era philosophy of *pungnyu*, the balance between the elegance of the moment and the rugged reality of the earth. It is rare to find a vessel that honors the soil so honestly." Chairman Kang's hand paused. He looked at Marina, not as a trophy on Brett's arm, but as a mind. The vipers in the corner shifted uncomfortably, their scripted attacks rendered useless by her sudden pivot into cultural mastery. Brett's jaw tightened, his fingers digging into his knee. This wasn't the plan. She was supposed to be his liability, a distraction to be managed. Instead, she was becoming the most formidable player in the room, commanding a respect that he had spent a decade trying to buy. The storm had retreated into a bruised purple twilight, leaving the Jeju coast smelling of salt and damp earth. Marina found him on the jagged basalt rocks below the estate, far from the polished obsidian floors and the suffocating hum of the server rooms. Brett had discarded his suit jacket. His white shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, sleeves rolled up to reveal the tattoos that spiraled like dark vines toward his wrists. He wasn't holding a phone. He was simply staring at the horizon, his silhouette looking fragile against the vast, churning power of the sea. "Chairman likes you," he said, his voice stripped of its usual corporate frost. "He hasn't mentioned the Joseon poet since my father's funeral. You gave him something he couldn't buy." Marina stepped onto the wet stone, the wind whipping her borrowed silk against her legs. "I didn't do it for the acquisition, Brett. I did it because he was trying to drown me in subtext. I just decided to swim." He finally turned to look at her, and for the first time, the ghost was gone. There was a raw, weary exhaustion in his eyes that no amount of wealth could mask. "My father built this empire on the idea that everything can be quantified," he whispered, gesturing toward the looming fortress above them. "But he died in a room full of people who were only waiting for his heart to stop so they could check the stock price. Every day I spend in that house, I feel myself becoming the same cold equation." In that moment, the $15,000 felt like a dirty secret between them. Marina realized she wasn't just a fake girlfriend. She was the first person in a decade who had looked at him without a calculator in her hand. The armor hadn't just cracked, it had fallen, leaving a man who was just as stranded as she was. The encounter happened in the glass-walled conservatory, a place where the tropical flora of Jeju felt like silent witnesses to the rot within the house. Marina was alone, tracing the vein of a monstera leaf, when Jae-hoon appeared from the shadows like a stain on a white silk sheet. He didn't come with threats this time. He came with a velvet box and the scent of expensive betrayal. "He's a black hole, Marina," Jae-hoon whispered, leaning against a pillar of cold steel. "Brett doesn't love, he acquires. He's using your brilliance to patch the holes in his sinking ship, and the moment that acquisition is signed, he'll discard you like a legacy operating system." He slid a check across the stone table, $50,000, written in a hand that was far too steady. It was more than triple what Brett had promised. It was her mother's mortgage, her student loans, and a future where she never had to look at a price tag again. "You have to do is leave," Jae-hoon continued, his voice a honeyed poison. "Go back to Baltimore tonight. I'll handle the press. Tell them he paid you to lie. You walk away a hero who exposed a fraud, with enough capital to never be a mistake again. Marina looked at the check, then up at the high-tech fortress that loomed over them. For the first time, the sociology of the room was simple. Power was being offered in exchange for a soul. She thought of the weary man on the rocks, the one who saw himself as a cold equation, and realized that Jae-hoon wasn't offering her a way out. He was offering her a seat at the table of vipers. The choice was no longer about the money. It was about whether she was willing to become the monster everyone assumed she already was. The sky above the estate broke open with a violence that mirrored the night of the Incheon blackout, lightning illuminating the obsidian walls in frantic, jagged bursts. Marina stood by the floor-to-ceiling glass of the library, the $50,000 check from Jae-hoon, still a heavy, cold weight in the pocket of her robe. The house hummed with the tension of the impending summit, a digital hive preparing for its final, televised assault. Brett appeared in the doorway, his silhouette framed by the flickering storm. He didn't ask about the cousin. He didn't have to. The data they had shared over the last week had created a telepathy more intimate than any real romance. He walked toward her, the usual corporate armor of his posture replaced by a visible, bone-deep exhaustion. "Board moved the vote up," he said, his voice barely audible over the thunder. "If you want to walk away, Marina, do it now. I've had my legal team prepare a severance that matches whatever my cousin offered you." "You don't have to walk into that den of vipers for me." Marina turned, the sociological distance she had maintained like a shield finally crumbling. She looked at the man who had spent a lifetime treating his heart as a liability to be optimized, and she realized the most dangerous variable in their arrangement. The script was gone. The $15,000 was no longer a motivation. It was a ghost. "Not staying for the money, Brett," she whispered, her hand hovering near his, the static in the air making the contact inevitable. "And you aren't paying for a girlfriend anymore." As their fingers finally brushed, the contact was a short circuit. In a world of cold equations and high-tech fortresses, they had become the only thing that couldn't be quantified. The lie had become their only truth, and as the storm raged outside, they realized that the fake feelings weren't just a liability. They were the only things worth saving. The air in the grand ballroom of the Shilla was clinical, filtered through high-tech ventilation and the nervous energy of 500 shareholders. Marina stood on the elevated stage, a shimmering apparition in charcoal silk, her hand resting in the crook of Brett's arm. Below them, a sea of lenses and expectant faces waited for the formal announcement of the acquisition, the moment Brett Harris would solidify his legacy. "Success has always been built on stability," Brett began, his voice echoing with a synthetic, godlike authority. Then the screen behind them flickered. It wasn't the projected growth chart or the sleek animation of the new merger. It was a scanned image of a wire transfer. $15,000, timestamped to the night of the Incheon blackout, routed to an account held by Marina Garst. A second image followed, a grainy, high-definition still from a security camera in the Jeju Conservatory, showing Marina's hand hovering over Jae-hoon's $50,000 check. The collective gasp of the audience sounded like a vacuum. The camera flashes became a strobe light of execution. Jae-hoon stood in the front row, his smile a jagged line of victory as he looked toward the chairman. "The stability of a paid actress, Brett." "Is this the cultural integration your board is supposed to trust?" Marina felt the stage turn into an island. The borrowed diamonds around her neck suddenly felt like a weight designed to drown her. Beside her, Brett's stature didn't break, but she felt the minute tremor in his arm, the sound of a man watching his father's empire collapse in real time. The sociology of the room had shifted from admiration to a bloodthirsty hunt. Every eye was a judge, every phone a witness to their ruin. The truth was out, stripped of its nuance, and the silence that followed was the loudest thing Marina had ever heard. Marina didn't wait for Brett to defend her. She stepped away from his side, moving toward the edge of the stage until she was staring directly into the lens of the primary broadcast camera. The room was a predator's den, but Marina had spent a year studying the anatomy of power. She knew exactly where the jugular was. "You see a transaction," she said, her voice amplified and steady, cutting through the frantic murmurs of the shareholders. "You see a wire transfer and assume you've found a lie. But as a student of sociology, I see something far more significant. I see the only honest data point in this entire room. She turned her gaze toward Jae-hoon, her eyes cold and clinical. Every person in this hall is here because of a contract. You are bound by dividends, by board seats, and by the fear of losing your status. Brett Harris didn't hire me to love him. He hired me to survive you. He sought out someone who wasn't part of your echo chamber, someone who could see the rot beneath the obsidian floors of this company. Marina pulled the $50,000 check from her pocket and held it up. The cameras zoomed in. My payment was for my time. My cousin-in-law's payment, however, was for my silence and my betrayal. If I were the fraud you claim I am, I would have taken the higher bidder. But I am standing here. Not because of a contract, but because Brett Harris is the only man in this industry who knows that the most valuable asset isn't a stock price. It's the truth. Silence in the ballroom shifted from judgmental to stunned. Marina looked back at Brett, a silent, mutual understanding passing between them that no algorithm could have predicted. She had flipped the script. She hadn't just saved the merger. She had redefined the logic of the game. The contract was over. But as they walked off the stage together, the flight home was no longer a retreat. It was a beginning.